My friends, the day has finally arrived. I'm getting back to my roots. That's right, we are finally getting back into our young adult book series from my childhood series. In the origins of this channel, I had a series where I was going through popular young adult book series from my childhood. We covered The Hunger Games, we covered Twilight, we covered Divergent, and we got a little goofy silly, and we just had a good time. Don't go back and watch the Hunger Games videos. Those are some of my earliest ones that are kind of terrible, but I emotionally can't private them. Genuinely don't watch them, but I can't take them down for some reason. But somewhere along the way, I got led astray. I wrapped up the Divergent series and I had every intention of diving into another one soon afterwards. And I knew exactly what book I was going to do too. And it's the one we're covering today because it had been non-stop requested through all of those videos. And yet, I just never picked it up. I never actually made the video. Not really sure why, but you know what? I'm making up for it today. We are finally going to talk about The Maze Runner. The Maze Runner was published in 2009, which means I would have been 11, which also means I would have been exactly in the target demographic for it at the time it was published. And yet somehow I never read it. I never read it. I never watched the movie. I somehow completely missed this one, guys. I don't know. I don't remember that many people talking about it. Like, I remember the movie poster. When I was doing research for this video, there was a specific movie poster that I saw that gave me intense deja vu. So I know that I was aware of the movies coming out at some point. But I never really engaged with this franchise, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't really have any memories of anybody in my life who did as well. So it always surprised me when it got requested so much, especially because when you look at the numbers, The Maze Runner wasn't nearly as popular as The Hunger Games and Divergent. The series has sold about 6 million copies worldwide, which is insane and really great numbers until you look at The Hunger Games numbers, which are over 100 million, and you'll see what I mean. It just didn't quite reach the same height. And so I went into it thinking, man, there just must be something about my content that appeals to Maze Runner fans. There's something about me that like scratches the same itch as a 16-year-old boy running through a maze. And I don't really know what that says about me and my content, but like, sure, okay, fine. But before we can fully dive in, I know that scheduling a doctor's appointment is on your to-do list. The process of finding and booking a new doctor has gotten so complicated and frustrating that it's easy to just shrug it off and say, you know what, I'll deal with the pain. That's where today's sponsor, ZocDoc, can help. Skip the phone calls and book a doctor's appointment straight through their website. My insurance carrier recently shifted, and their ability to search and compare local in-network doctors has made this transition so much easier on me. The doctor profiles are super detailed, and they have real reviews from real patients to help you choose what's right for you. Once you find your doctor, you can see real appointment listings that are usually for appointments within 24 to 72 hours. And the best part? It's free to use. Don't tell yourself you'll do it later, because you deserve to have your health concerns addressed. Just take that first step of clicking the link in the description, ZocDoc.com/MeredithNavaco. It'll take you to their website and you'll immediately see what I mean. It's so easy. Taking care of your health just got easier. Head to ZocDoc.com/MeredithNavaco to get started and check that appointment off your to-do list. All right. Let's talk about The Maze Runner by James Dashner. And I will say, I hate this cover. Hate it. It's so ugly. Were these the original covers? Now I need to look this up. I'm just seeing this in the movie poster. I don't know. It's not calling to me. Maybe that's why I never read it. Maybe I saw it on the shelf as a tween and judged it by its cover. But because I had never read it before and all I knew going in was that there was a maze, presumably because it's called The Maze Runner, I actually filmed a little vlog clip of myself reading the description for the very first time and making some predictions about what I thought the whole series was going to end up being on that alone. So let's cut to that clip. Roll the tape.
I'm realizing I don't even know like what the whole deal with the maze is. I literally know so little about the series. I know there is a maze, couldn't tell you why, so I thought I could like read the premise. When Thomas wakes up in the lift, the only thing he can remember is his name. He's surrounded by strangers, boys whose memories are also gone. Outside the towering stone walls that surround the glade is a limitless, ever-changing maze. It's the only way out, and no one's ever made it through alive. Then a girl arrives, the first girl ever, and the message she delivers is terrifying. It's so early in the morning. I woke up and I couldn't get back to sleep. Then a girl arrives, the first girl ever, and the message oh my god. I promise I can read, guys. Then a girl arrives, the first girl ever, and the message she delivers is terrifying. Gut predictions right away. They make it through the maze. At some point in the series, they discover what the deal with the maze is, I'm assuming, and also there's a romance with this girl. Just if I had to guess. What do I think the deal with the maze is gonna be? I mean, the kids are gonna be in the glade for a reason, obviously, right? This isn't just happening. I'm going post-apocalyptic. I'm going, they're all, stolen from their families or orphans. They're collected for what? For an army? Is this how they draft into the military? Maze is the only way out. This is what I'm struggling to understand from this premise. Are they in the glade to run the maze? They're only there to run the maze, but nobody's ever made it out? Or is the glade something else and they don't want to be there, wherever there is, but the only way out is through the maze? So I'm going to give you 2 predictions for which situation it is. If it's that the whole reason they're there is to go through the maze, then I think they're going to be looking for somebody with some kind of special talent, a la Divergent, even though this was published before Divergent. Okay, so if anything, Divergent would have been inspired by this, but still, maybe they're looking for somebody like very special who can make it through the maze, and of course our main character will be that person. That's if the whole purpose is for them to run the maze. If it's that they're being kept at this place called the Glade, that's for something else. And the maze is the only way out, but they run the maze to try and get out because the glade is super awful. Then I'm guessing they're either slaves or training for the military. I'm looking at the titles of the later books and I'm like, okay, we have the Scorch Trials, the Death Cure, the Kill Order, and the Fever Code. Scorch Trials implies like very hot location with some kind of test. That's called media literacy is what that is. It's when you can deduce things from context clues. Scorch, hot, trials, some kind of test. So the maze is going to be a test for sure. It's a test for something, right? I mean, we're all in agreement on that, right? So then maybe the Scorch Trials are part 2, but then they said no one's ever made it through the maze. So he's going to be the first person to make it through the maze. No, you know what? I bet people have made it through the maze before. I bet they lie about people dying in the maze. I bet people make it through the maze all the time. Then we have the Death Cure, the Kill Order, and the Fever Code. Okay, so those are the other 4 books. It's a 5-book series. We will be doing all of them because when I do these, I usually like to do the whole series. So unless I'm like having a horrible time, which I can't imagine I'm gonna be because these books were huge. I just never read them for some reason. I don't even know I can't believe I don't know anything about this. Okay, full send on my like just gut having read the back predictions for the whole entire series, okay? I'm going for this one. The plot twist is gonna be that they made it through the maze. And it turns out that people make it through the maze all the time and they lie about people making it through the maze. And it's like the first step in a set of tests that they need to do. And they don't yet know why they need to pass these tests. So then this one is going to be like test number 2, Scorch Trials. At the end of that one, we're going to find out, I don't know, that the girl was planted and that she's actually working for the whoever is putting them through this thing. The Death Cure, that's the one that's the hardest for me. Because like the Kill Order implies, like I bet the Kill Order is like the government has sent out a kill order against him. Right, our main character. I don't even know his name. What's his name? Thomas. Oh my god, Thomas? Tomas? Isn't Tomas the name of the main guy in Divergent? Cogs of my brain are running so slow due to the lack of sleep situation we're dealing with right now. Tobias. Oh my god. Tobias, not Tomas. So they are slightly different names. Still similar though. But anyway, I bet the government sent out a kill order against him, or that he is being sent on a kill order towards the girl. So I bet that's what that one is. And then the Fever Code, I think, is going to be them finding out that maybe all of this was because there's some kind of disease that they need to cure. Oh, wait. There's a tagline on that says the story of how the maze was built. Yeah, so I bet there's some kind of disease. Okay, so maybe it's only a 4-book series mainly, and then there's like a prequel. I was going to say this just shows how little research I do before I start videos, but yeah, duh. I'm starting working on the video. This is when I'm going to start the research. Oh my god, here I am exposing that before I start doing the research for a video, I usually haven't done any research. So I bet there's some kind of illness. But why would the maze help them solve an illness? It's going to be some kind of like, they need some genetic or something like that. I don't know. And it helps you get through the main maze. This is all going to be wrong, by the way. I just thought this would be funny.
I scare myself. To be fair, I was basing some of those predictions off of the titles of some of the later books in the series. That's absolutely insane that I got all of that just from the premise and the titles. And would it shock you to hear I got a lot of that right? But anyway, we've had quite enough preamble. Let me dive into my opinion, my adult opinion on reading The Maze Runner for the first time. time, which actually does mean I have to give a disclaimer. So we have like the tiniest bit more preamble, but I am going into reading this book as an adult, having never read it before and having no nostalgia for it whatsoever. So if this was a book you really adored, I just want to warn you about that, because I have very mixed feelings about it upon finishing it. There were some really, really great things about it and some really not so great things about it. The book starts with our main character Thomas waking up in what we soon find out is called the box. It's a metal box that seems to be rising, but he can't see anything. He's in complete darkness. And by his own description is lifted up for like hours and hours. And he can only remember that his name is Thomas and that he had some kind of life that he now can't remember. So he remembers enough to know that he definitely was a person before this moment, but he doesn't know what person he was. Eventually, the box stops rising and the top opens, and a bunch of fellow teen boys are looking down at him. And what ensues then has to be the most annoying 50 pages of a book I've ever read. I did warn you if you loved this book that there were things I didn't like about it. This place that he has just been lifted into by this box is called the Glade, and there are a bunch of boys living there, and they have a whole structured society. They keep telling Thomas that a new person is brought up in the box every month, and so they're very used to introducing greenies to this new society, and that it's just better if you don't know everything right at first because it can be really overwhelming, which is all well and good, right? If you want to slow roll information over the course of the book, that's fine. You don't want the whole beginning to be super info dumpy. I would have no problem with that if it wasn't for the frequency with which Thomas thinks to himself, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. I just wish somebody would tell me what's going on. Or that he would ask a question to somebody and get the response, you'll find out soon enough, or you don't want to know that yet, or we'll explain everything when it's time. You're being thrown different unique slang terms for this universe and different words for different things they have in the Glade. And you see this maze and you find out that it is a maze, and there are these big walls and they close and you find out that there's a maze on the other side. And you're finding all of this out because Thomas is finding all of this out. But anytime he asks for more details, somebody is immediately like, I can't tell you the details yet. So the way that this author approaches the world building is by basically giving you the labels for everything first and not telling you what any of those labels actually are, and then later explaining things. But I'm not joking when I tell you that it takes like 50 pages to start getting some of those answers, and most of those 50 pages are just exchanges between Thomas and the various boys where they'll say words he doesn't know and he'll be like, wait, what's that? And they'll be like, oh, can't tell you that yet. And he'll be like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. I just wish they would tell me what that thing is. Girl, me too. And that's where I'm saying, like, I don't necessarily hate this as a way to introduce things, but I just feel like it could have been executed so much better. And it's one of my biggest complaints about the book is just how repetitive the beginning is. And it was such a frustrating way to get this world building. Not to mention the fact that all the boys are like super mean to Thomas right away, and nobody really seems all that nice to each other. And that is one of my other big overarching notes for this book, is that I'm told that there is this brotherhood and this camaraderie between all the boys at the Glade, but I don't really feel like I saw it on page. I feel like what I saw on page was a lot of very antagonistic. There was a point in the book much later where Thomas remarks that he really, really likes this other guy named Newt. And I remember I read this line and I literally thought to myself, why do you like him? Like, you have actually been given no reason to like him, and you have given him no reason to like you either. Like, these boys are not nice to each other. They don't treat each other well, and we never really see them like enjoy each other's company or have fun either. So you get to the 50-page mark, you start to get some answers, and all the information I'm about to give you is slow rolled over the next 50-ish pages, but I think it's less confusing if I just explain the way this whole society works all at once. They're in an area they call the Glade. It's this lush green land, which is weird because it never rains, and there's a society of teen to young adult age boys. They have all these different jobs that you can have, so you can be one of the people who grows food, or you can manage livestock, you can help cook, you can help build stuff, etc. Supplies are sent up every week, and once a month they get a new new boy for their society that they usually call the Greenie until they get another new boy. By the way, there are also a bunch of like slang terms. They say clonk, I think, for poop. I'm not going to bother going through all of those because I don't really think it's relevant. Kind of seems like it's a pretty chill place. It's just a society of boys and they all get along well enough, I suppose, and they grow food and livestock and they get some supplies sent to them once a week and you get a new person every month and everything's great, right? Yet tiny nuance, none of them remember who they are or why they're there. And they're all trapped there. And the only way out is through the maze. The doors close every night, which shocks Thomas right at first, until he's told by one of the leaders, Albie, about these things called the Grievers, and he peeks through the window at one of them. They're these really freaky looking half slug, half machine monster sort of situation. Quite frankly, was a little bit hard to imagine based off of the description, but I got enough to be horrified, and I think that's what he wanted. I was imagining a slug that had a bunch of things sticking out of it, and they move by like turning into a ball and rolling, and then they like extend out into a slug again, and then they like roll up. And those freaks are out in the maze. The maze is the only way out. Luckily, they mostly only come out at night, but occasionally they come out during the day, and that does become relevant over the course of the narrative. But they never enter the glade during the day for some reason, and at night, the walls close. Nobody has ever survived overnight in the maze. So what's the deal with the maze? Why have they had so much trouble solving it? Well, we actually don't get that answer for a very long time, which brings me to another gripe I have about this book, which is that it's just not that much about the maze. I wanted there to be so much more maze. The book's called The Maze Runner, and there's this maze that's this very important aspect of it, and I just like kind of thought there would be more maze running. They also have a rule that only runners are allowed into the maze. So even during the day when the doors are open, none of the other boys in the glade are supposed to go out into the maze. Thomas is trying to adjust to this new reality for himself, and he has this feeling, this draw to the maze. He can't really explain it. He really wants to go into the maze. He really wants to be a runner. He wants to help solve the maze. But they get kind of sidetracked by the fact that the box shows up again the following day, which has never happened before. In the entire time that any of these boys have been here, the box has come on a really regular cadence. Once a week to deliver supplies, once a month to bring a new person. So it's very strange to all the boys that it arrives the following day, but then it's made even stranger by the fact that there's a person inside. And not just a person, but a girl! A girl? There's never been a girl at the glade. Not only that, but she's unconscious. As they're trying to figure out what's up with her and if she's okay, she sits up out of nowhere, says everything's gonna change, and drops a piece of paper on the ground and then just passes back out. And when they pick up the paper, it says she's the last one ever. Oh, I forgot to mention, when you get stung by a griever, it's a very painful experience and you need to be given a serum to heal. And once people get the serum, they come out the other side changed. And so they call this the changing. Gally, who is our resident evil character, he's our bully for the duration of this narrative, he has been through the changing, and he saw Thomas in his mind, in his visions when he was going through it. And so he's very suspicious of Thomas right away and is kind of trying to figure out what's his deal and like, why did I have a vision of this guy when I was going through the changing? When Thomas arrives, there is a boy who had been freshly stung by a griever who is actively going through this changing. And after the whole situation with the girl where they take her because she's still unconscious to kind of take care of her while she's in this coma, and she's going to be in the coma a while, so I'm pretty much not going to bring her up until she's relevant again. If you're wondering where she is, she's in a coma. But this boy, Ben, who's freshly been through the changing, attacks Thomas out of nowhere and tries to kill him, and Newt, who's one of the leaders, ends up shooting him through the face with an arrow, but not before he can say that the reason that he's trying to kill Thomas is because he also saw him during the changing. And he says something to the effect of, no, you don't understand, he's bad. He's here to get us out. Like, he's gonna get us out, and that's bad. And everybody's like, what? These boys have been here 2 years trying to do this, trying to solve this maze. That's like what they've been moving towards so that they can get out. And so why would it be bad that Thomas is going to get them out of the maze? That kind of seems crazy. But it turns out that he did not die from this arrow to the face, and so they end up banishing him because he tried to kill another glader, and of course they can't allow that, right? So they have to punish him. And you can imagine, like, you probably immediately pictured what they're going to do. They're going to stick him out in the maze overnight, which is a death sentence because nobody survived in the maze overnight. But their method of doing this is hilariously convoluted. I understand that they don't want to be near him when they're pushing him through the doors, And it's also, the doors are very, very thick. And so you could risk getting crushed in between them. Like, I understand why they would need some kind of apparatus to do this. But what they do is they put a collar on him, and then they have this really long stick that has 2 pieces to it, so they can like detach one piece from the other. And then a bunch of the boys line up and grab the stick and just push him by the neck to the other side of the doors as they're closing. I don't know, maybe I'm being overly picky, but there was just something about their method for pushing people through the doors as they're closing to banish them that was supposed to be kind of like an eerie and really sad scene, because the guy's like freaking out and begging for forgiveness and stuff. But I was just very distracted by their method of pushing him through the doors. Reading the scene, I was just like, they have one really long stick that a bunch of the boys hold. I was just really distracted by it, that's all. But anyway, we finally, and I mean finally, get a description of what a maze runner even is at page 100. Like, we know that there are these people called the runners, but we finally find out what they do. They go out and they run and they map the maze. There's 2 things you need to know about the maze. 1 is that it changes a little bit every night. 2 is that the ways in which it changes are a pattern. So it's not a completely different maze every night. It's like a few doors and walls will change. And there is a pattern to it, and about every month, the pattern repeats. So why are they bothering to map it, you might ask? Well, it's because there's no noticeable exit. Yeah, that's right. In the 2 years that this Society of Boys have been here, they actually have managed to map the whole entire maze. And there's no way out. So what's the point? Why are they still doing it? The only explanation we have right now is just that the only alternative is giving up, and they had to believe that they would notice something eventually that would give them the clue to the way out of the maze, or else it would just make them all feel so hopeless. And so they still go out in the maze and they still try to find a way out. They try to see if an entrance has opened or if something has changed in a noticeable way, if the pattern shifts or anything like that. One of the runners, Minho, comes back and tells everybody that there was a dead griever. And so this is something different. There was a dead griever out in the maze, and that's really weird. And so the following day, him and Albie, who's the leader, go back out to find the griever where it was to investigate a little bit further. And by the time it's getting to where doors are about to close, pretty much everybody is like, oh my god, they're not going to make it back. They must both be dead or something. But right at the last second, as the doors start closing, Minho and Albie come around the corner, and Minho is like helping Albie along. Like, it's obvious that he's having a lot of trouble walking, and they're trying their best to make it to the doors as quickly as possible, but no matter how quickly they're moving, they're still super far away. And we're inside of Thomas's mind, and he's like, oh my god, they need help. And he's like saying to people, we need to help them, and everybody's like, no, it's against the rules to go into the maze to help somebody else, because we might as well not waste lives like that. But at the last second, Thomas runs through the doors, and Minho immediately is like, what the hell were you thinking? You just killed yourself. Why did you just do that? That was so stupid. And he starts absolutely freaking out. Thomas is like, hey man, I mean, there's 3 of us. I know Albie is a little bit worse for wear. Turns out he got stung by a griever, because the griever they thought was dead wasn't actually dead. It was just laying there for a while, and they don't really know why. And they honestly never really explain why, now that I think about it. I didn't even realize that until just now. I thought we were gonna get an explanation eventually as to why it did that. But anyway, so when they went up to it to see what was going on, they ended up waking it back up or something, and then it stung Albie before it ran away. The pain that I mentioned during the changing doesn't really set in until they actually get the serum. And so he's kind of unconscious at this point, and Minho is like really freaking out, and the second that they start hearing the griever noises, he immediately just runs off and says that their best bet is to split up. And Thomas is just standing there like, okay, whatever, I'm gonna try and help Albie. And so what he thinks to do is tie a vine around his chest, basically, because there's a bunch of ivy on the walls, and lift him up so that he's hanging a little bit from the roof, and lift him up so that he's hanging. And then he climbs up and is chilling next to him, and he's kind of hoping that the grievers can't climb walls or won't be able to notice them up there or whatever. But unfortunately, he's wrong. So Griever comes around the corner and does notice him, and they have a whole intense chase scene. And as a part of that chase scene, he kind of fakes the Griever out at one point, so it's charging at him and he dives out of the way at the last second, and so it continues past him for a bit, and that allows him to run the other way. And Minho actually sees him doing this, and so he finds him and says, I saw you avoid the Griever, and it actually gave me an idea. Come with me. And he takes them to this place they call the cliff, which is the only opening in the maze, but it's like out to a cliff, and if you were to jump off, you just fall forever and ever and ever and ever. They fake out all of the Grievers that are chasing forcing them at that point to get them to jump off the cliff in the same way. But weirdly enough, none of them fall super far. In fact, when they jump off the cliff, they just kind of disappear. So the boys start throwing rocks off the cliff, and all of the rocks do just plummet towards the ground. So the rocks don't disappear like the grievers do. So obviously neither of them trust us enough to try to jump off the cliff to see if that's the way out. Oh my God. I wrote here in this note, I know I already kind of waxed poetic about how all of the characters were kind of annoying, but I put it so succinctly here, and so I want to read you this note I made on page 117, I'm assuming. Everyone is so fucking annoying. 117 pages of proof of why yes and is important. So I think that's what was annoying me. It's like they would be having these conversations where someone would say something and someone else would just be like, no, we're not doing that, or we're not talking about that, or I'm not explaining that to you. And it's truly demoralizing as an audience member. And it was just not fun to read. But anyway, let's continue with the plot. Through this whole jumping out of the way and tricking them into jumping off the cliff strategy, both Minho and Thomas survive the night. And when they return back to the door, they find that Albie also survived the night. Nobody climbed up there and bothered him while he was unconscious. So when the doors open, they're all just able to walk back through into the glade. And everybody else is like, oh my God, nobody's ever survived overnight in the maze. Like, what the hell? So they end up calling a council meeting of all of the leaders, basically all the leaders of the different jobs. They all meet with Newt as the de facto leader, since Albie's out of commission, since he now has to get the serum and go through the changing because he's been stung by a griever. They're having this whole conversation about what to do with Thomas specifically because he ran into the maze. And if you'll remember, you're only allowed to go into the maze if you're a runner. And you might be wondering, well, yeah, but he went out there to help people. But they have this whole conversation about how order is really important in the glade, and they don't want to encourage people to just willy-nilly run into the maze, even if it worked out this time around. But Minho is really, really defensive of Thomas, and specifically says that he thinks that he should actually become the keeper of the runners. And he says that this is because when they got locked out there, Thomas was super calm, did not freak out at all, and Minho freaked out and was panicking. He makes the argument that he thinks that Thomas should not just become a runner, but become the leader of the runners. And in the end, the council decide to put him in the slammer overnight, which is their little concrete room that they lock people in for punishment. Minor punishment that doesn't require banishment, you know? They decide that he has to spend a full day in there, and then after that, he gets to become a runner. Not the keeper of the runners, but a runner. And in the aftermath of it, Thomas is like, man, you wanted me to become the keeper? That's kind of crazy. And Minho basically is like, no, I didn't. I just figured if I shot really high that they would compromise. I just wanted you to become a runner. I knew they'd never agree to that. And I did think that was really funny. This is when Thomas finds out that the changing actually gives people memories of their old life back. That means that Gally and Thomas knew each other in the real world, right? And so this is a transition that Albie is going through right now. When he gets out the other side of it, he starts to tell Thomas about something called the flare, but he doesn't give any other details. And he just says they can't go back to the real world. It's like awful out there. He's starting to try and tell Thomas why and give him a little bit more information. And then he starts strangling himself. And they end up having to like physically restrain him to get him to stop. And he says afterwards that he felt like somebody was controlling him in his mind, and that he thinks that whoever put them in there has some kind of weird thing in his head that makes it so that if he shares too much information about what he remembers during the changing, that he would choke himself out to get himself to stop, basically, which is fascinating because that never comes up again. And much later in the book, not only do other people who have gone through the changing share in depth what they remember, but Albie does too. And he never tries to choke himself out again. So I don't really know what's up with that. I don't know why that just disappeared. This is when the girl, she doesn't quite wake up from her coma, but she starts to speak to Thomas in his mind. And she tells him that her name is Teresa. And he's really freaked out by this whole thing, obviously, as one would be. He's just hearing her voice in his head. But it also kind of freaks him out because she says to him, we can pass the trials. It has to end. They sent me as a trigger. It was you and me, Tom. We did this to them. To us. So here's the first mention of this concept of a trial. Oh, and Albie also tells Thomas that Thomas was helping the creator. So he also remembers Thomas from their old lives before the Glade, and that he was more on the side of the creators. So then Minho starts training Thomas to be a runner. And he explains to them the whole thing about them going out and mapping the maze every day and comparing all the differences and stuff. And so Thomas and Minho are out in the maze doing the training, and they find some stuff written on the wall. that says World in Catastrophe, Killzone Experiment Department. I forgot to mention this, but there are these little metal, almost bug-looking things that run around sometimes that the boys tell Thomas are the creators watching them, and they say Wicked on the back. Here's the thing. I am an adult, okay? I don't know how obvious this would be if you were reading this book as a child, but it probably only took me 2 times. I'll admit it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time they said World in Catastrophe, Killzone Experiment Department that I realized it, but pretty much the second time those words were on the page, I was like, wait a minute. That acronym is Wicked. But again, I'm an adult, so if you were in the target demographic for this book, that might not have been as immediately obvious. So then the girl says to Thomas in his mind, Tom, I just triggered the ending. What does that mean? Well, the next day they wake up and the sun is gone. It's just gone. Do you think that's related? And Thomas pretty much immediately figures out that this must mean that the sun was never actually there. And this gray sky that they're looking at now must actually just be the ceiling of whatever building this massive maze is in. And then they go out into the maze right when the doors open and they follow a griever and see it jump off the cliff and kind of confirm a theory that the grievers jump off the cliff and go through some kind of invisible hole. And so Thomas starts to hatch this plan of like, well, maybe we could escape through that hole. But it's like a very specific part. Like you have to jump into a very specific place. And if you miss it, then you would just fall off this giant cliff. The girl starts to wake up. And as she's waking up, she tells Thomas in his mind that the maze is actually a code. And he doesn't understand what that means right away, but that's just a tidbit of information they have now, which is that the maze is a code. And then the girl wakes up. And she's still able to talk to Thomas in his mind when she's awake, and then he's able to talk back to her as well eventually, but it takes him a minute to figure it out. So they have a telepathic connection now. And then that night, the doors don't close. And so everybody at the Glade is really freaking out because that means the grievers can get into the Glade. But when the grievers come, they only take one person. Oh, yeah. Gally, sorry, I forgot to write something down about Gally, and so I forgot to tell you something. Back in the plot when Thomas was elected runner, Gally was really upset about this and ends up kind of disappearing, and they don't really know where he went for a while, and they figure he's hiding somewhere in the Glade and his friends are taking care of him, but he shows back up, and he tells everybody that he was right about Thomas, that Thomas is ruining everything, and that the grievers are gonna come and take one person a day until they solve the maze and get out. And then the grievers take him. And everybody's like, that was weird. But it turns out the Gally was pretty right. And over the course of the next few days, they come back and they take a single person. So they figure that they're going to do this until either all of them are dead or they actually figure out how to get them out of there. Also, the map room is set on fire this night. And so all the maps are burned. And during a conversation with Teresa where they're talking about how the maze is a code, her and Thomas are talking about how the maze changes every night in a pattern and how they always compare it to the day before to make sure it changed in the same way, section by section. And they have the realization that it's like, well, what if they're supposed to compare the sections to each other? What if that would like reveal something that reveals some kind of code? And they're excited about this at first until Thomas remembers that the map room burned down. And we find out that Albie actually did it on purpose. I don't think we find it out until later, but we find out that he did it on purpose because he did not want them to escape the Glade because he now remembers what is happening in the outside world and he doesn't want to go back. But it turns out that Minho saved the maps. He'd actually moved them out of the map room. And so they are actually able to compare the sections, and they realize when they draw them on wax paper and stack them on top of each other, it'll form a letter. And so when the maze is changing, it's to form a different letter. And so they are starting to decode this, but Thomas and Minho were also talking about going out into the maze overnight because now that the doors are open all night, maybe there's something about being in the maze at night that will give them some kind of clue. This serves more just for them to like go out there, try this idea and realize it didn't really work and come back and they're kind of demoralized. And they find out that they did decode what the maze was saying, but the code is float, catch, bleed, death, stiff, push. What does that mean? What do they do with this? So Thomas decides to go for a last-ditch desperate plan, which is to intentionally get himself stung by the griever that comes for the next sacrificial boy that night in order to himself go through the changing so that he can remember, because everybody keeps saying that he was the one with the creators and that he was somehow involved in all the maze stuff and all of that. And so he decides to go through the changing to see what he remembers. This moment in the book actually pissed me off so much because what if I told you that we actually see none of his memories? We don't see what he remembers, we instead get a scene of him waking up the next day and just telling everybody else what he saw. Why, man? We could have just seen it through his eyes. On what planet is him explaining what he remembers more engaging than actually just watching him go through it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. What he remembers is that there was some kind of horrible event, and that the earth is in chaos and crisis, and that there's kind of this apocalypse happening, and that they're in the maze to test their resolve. And it's basically a survival of the fittest situation, almost like a forced Lord of the Flies kind of environment, to see who the best and the smartest are and who of them survive this maze trial, because they're going to need them for something really important in this apocalypse sort of situation. So essentially that they want the winners / survivors of these trials to do something else important when they re-enter the rest of the world. And also that he and Teresa helped design the maze. They were forced to do it by the creators. They didn't really want to do it, seemingly. But the reason that they were picked special is because they're telepathic with each other. We get zero explanation as to how they're telepathic. That doesn't even come at the end of the book. Why this matters, where this came from. Mind you, there's no magic in this book. Like, I just want to stress that even as we get the explanation as to what's going on outside of the maze, which we'll get to at the end of me recounting the plot, there's no other supernatural anything. So I don't really understand where the telepathy is going to come into play, like overarchingly. But yes, he and Teresa have both a telepathic connection and a romantic connection. And we don't really understand how or why, but he says that that's why they helped design the maze. That's also never explained. How does them being telepathic with each other help design the maze? You might be wondering, what was the apocalypse situation? I'm so glad you asked. So apparently there were solar flares that all came all at once that like scorched large parts of the earth and completely destroyed all of the plant life and wildlife. And this somehow made it really easy for a disease to spread that they called the flare. That's like a brain disease that slowly makes you go crazy and then you die, and they don't have a cure. Okay, so there are solar flares and the flare, and these are different things. Right now they're not connected. I'm sure at some point in the book series they will be. That's such a confusing, like, why would he name it that? Why would he call the disease the flare? There's solar flares and then there's the flare, and these are like separate apocalyptic forces right now. The solar flares also don't seem to be continuing, to be fair. It seems like there were a set of really intense solar flares that destroyed a lot of the environment and scorched the earth. I was kind of imagining the Mad Max world when they were describing some of it. But anyway, he then tells them that he actually just remembers how they get out of the maze now, which is that they have to go through the Griever hole, and there's a computer on the other side that they can put the code into, and that will get them out of the maze. But in order to do that, they probably need to sacrifice one of them because the Grievers are taking somebody every night. So they'll have to go at night when all the Grievers are out of the hole, and then somebody will have to be the sacrifice to distract them, basically. And they go and they accomplish this. And Albie is the one who sacrifices himself. It doesn't actually end up working, and it turns out that because they are actually trying to go get into the Griever hole, the Grievers are... By the way, that's what they're calling it in narrative. I'm not the one calling it the Griever hole. Because they're trying to get in the Griever hole, the Grievers are trying to harm them and stop them from doing this. And so about half of them that set out on this mission die. On the other side of it, there are about 20 survivors. But they do make it through. And in the end, they're typing all the words into the computer, and they can't figure out why it won't let them enter the last word. And there's this little boy who I haven't mentioned up to now. His name is Chuck, and he's like 12. He's the youngest in the Glade, and he and Thomas have become pretty close over the course of the narrative. It's just not really like super relevant to the plot, so I haven't brought it up. Just assume Chuck has been there the whole time. And Chuck's just kind of standing there, and as they're trying to type in the last word, and they're like, why won't it let us type the word at push? And he's like, do you think we're just supposed to push that? And there's a button that says kill the maze. And they're like, oh, that's what push means. And then they push the button and it all ends. They go down a slide. Doesn't really feel tonally appropriate, but that's actually remarked by Thomas. Like, he has a moment where he thinks to himself, what, is this a game to them? So I'll let it slide, pun intended. They end up in a room where this researcher walks in and starts explaining to them that she knows they hate them right now, but hopefully one day they'll understand. It was all to save humanity, and Gally is with her. He's standing right next to her. And they're like, oh, I guess he wasn't actually killed by the Grievers. She says, but before we like move forward, there's one final test or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the line is. And then Gally tells them, she's controlling me. I don't have control over it. And as he's saying that, he kind of seemingly like shuts down and gets mind controlled. and then he throws a giant dagger directly at Thomas. And Chuck jumps in front of him, and so Chuck is actually the one who gets hit by the knife and dies. And this is very heartbreaking. He was one of the only characters I liked, so this was very upsetting for me. And Thomas is obviously very upset about this as well, and he attacks Gally and is really beating him up, but then he gets pulled away from him. And as all of this is happening, this group of people run in the room are seemingly not affiliated with the researchers, and in fact, they just start shooting and killing all the researchers in this lab. And all the kids are like, what the hell is going on? The people break them out of there and then tell them that they don't agree with Wicked's methods, like, at all. And their whole mission and all of that, they don't agree with it. And so they're breaking the kids out, and they're so sorry for everything that happened to them. And then they're bussed to another location where they explain to them a little bit more in depth about what's going on with, like, the solar flares and the disease and stuff like that. And then they say, you know, between here and the Andes region, how crazy is it that this book has a disease that involves the Andes? What timing for me to be reading this? But they think there's a cure. And so they have to cross all of that land to get there to find the cure, and that they want the boys' help with it. And so the boys are going to, like, help them with this mission, basically, to go find the cure. And the boys are like, I mean, okay. None of us remember anything from going into the maze, so I guess we don't know anything different. But then there's an epilogue. And it's revealed that this entire breakout thing was staged. It's revealed in a really clever way, too, where it's like a memo, basically, that the lead researcher is sending to people to update them on the experiment. And she's telling them that the whole thing went swimmingly, that they're ready to start phase 2 and all of that. And so it's this cool way to reveal the whole breaking them out thing was completely staged. And the researchers probably understood that these boys were going to hate the people who put them in the maze, and that they probably weren't going to be super willing to help them and actually might attack them and try and kill them instead. They staged this whole thing. I guess I'm jumping to conclusions that this is why, but I think it's safe to assume that this is why. So they staged this whole thing to make them think that they're now working with this rebel group, when in reality it's still this wicked organization. And that this whole time they want these boys to cross this desert region and get to this area in the Andes, and there is a cure there. And that's the Maze Runner. Now, obviously throughout it, I was kind of pausing to give you my feelings here and there on certain specific things, but I'll take the opportunity now to tell you something kind of surprising. Despite my complaints that I shared, I overarchingly enjoyed my experience reading this book, and that's why I'm saying I have kind of mixed feelings about it. It was only really during the beginning that I was actively annoyed, and it's because of the whole just shutting the narrative down by refusing to explain anything sort of situation. Like, that did really annoy me. But by the time we really got into the swing of things, I was pretty hooked, and I found myself very curious to understand what was going on with the maze and what the solution was going to be, and trying to figure it out for myself too. And so I did actually really enjoy reading a lot of this book. But that doesn't mean that there aren't problems with it. Obviously, I've already pointed out quite a few of them. Main ones being the whole part at the beginning that I've complained about plenty, so I won't do that again. Also, just that not a lot of the characters were very likable for me, and I don't know if that's just a me thing, but I just found a lot of them to be very, like, mean to each other and very annoying. Like I said, there was a point in the book where Thomas says that he really likes Newt, and I literally had the thought, really? But neither of those are these books' biggest flaw, truthfully. Listen, I understand that within the entire young adult genre, there is a certain amount of suspending your disbelief that you have to do as an adult, specifically as it pertains to it being children that are doing these things in these books. But I have read so much young adult in my time that does a significantly better job justifying why it's children or teenagers. You expect me to believe that there is a very deadly illness that is spreading all throughout the world, and there's no cure, and it slowly drives people insane, and that we need to send a group of people on a mission to this area in South America because there's rumors of a cure there. You expect me to believe that the best people that we have to send on this mission are a group of teenage boys? Not only that, but a group of teenage boys that you haven't even really trained for missions. They were just in a maze. Why did you put them in the maze? Like, plenty of books have that survival of the fittest kind of vibe, but more related to some kind of training program. And I understand, here's the thing, that would have been an entirely different book, obviously, if they understood what the maze was and knew it was a training program of some kind or something, or if it wasn't even a maze to begin with and it was just them training. Like, that would have been an entirely different book. But I guess therein lies my problem. This is what I think happened, okay? I think James Dashner, the author of this book, came up with the concept of putting a boy in a maze with no memory, and there being kind of a society within this maze that's trying to get out of the maze. And the way they get out of the maze is that the maze is secretly a code. Like, there's no actual exit. It's that the maze is a code. And he was like, great idea, sick idea. And I agree, that is a really cool idea. And then he was like, okay, why are they in the maze? Okay, well, what if it was like a survival of the fittest situation? It's all a big experiment, and there are these researchers, and they're doing some kind of test with these teen boys. And so they need to band together and get out of this maze. Okay, cool. I'm with you so far. And then he's like, well, why do they need these boys? And he's like, well, what if there was an apocalypse going on and they needed people to go on a mission and they needed to make sure they had the best of the best? So the maze are like trials for them to ensure that they have the best of who they have. And then they send them on this mission. And then he was like, okay, so A, why would they have chosen children? And B, why did they wipe their memories? Why did they come up with this crazy, intricate, and incredibly expensive way to run this test in a world where resources are so short, and that's like part of the apocalypse? Like, why would they have not tried to find the best of the best and the survival of the fittest in a different way? Why would they have wiped their memories? And why didn't they choose adults? Like, why would they not have thought that maybe a crew of adults would be the best people we have to do this instead of, I don't know, a 16-year-old boy? And he's like, okay. You know what? I'm done thinking about this. I've solved it down far enough, okay? There are the boys, they're in this maze, and there's an apocalypse, and the maze is for them to find the best people to send out to find the cure for the disease that's happening during the apocalypse. And you know what? Maybe we don't need to think about the details. Why do we need to ask ourselves why there's a maze? The book's called The Maze Runner. There has to be a maze. I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. The whole premise for this book makes not one single ounce or lick of sense. And I understand that maybe things are going to get retconned as I read forward in the series, and I'm going to make videos on all the books, but I'm sorry. That's why I said, if you loved this book as a kid, I'm so sorry, but the premise of it actually makes zero sense whatsoever. And I just don't understand, in a world where resources are so short, why they would waste so many resources using this as their survival of the fittest test when they could have just had these boys fight to the death. I can already anticipate a few comments, because there's one tiny justification putting in there that I haven't mentioned up to now, but I had to save it for the end of that rant because it's gonna trigger another rant. The only explanation we're given is that part of what they were looking for is this problem-solving skills and the best of the best, right? The strongest, the smartest, the bravest people. But also they were looking for tenacity. They were looking for people who would not give up in the face of an impossible challenge. And this was the group of people they ended up with, because these were the people who didn't give up on solving the maze and getting out, no matter how dire things got. They wanted the bravest and the smartest. I've already gone over why this would be a very stupid way to find that. They also wanted people with problem-solving skills. What problem-solving skills? These kids did not solve this maze. They didn't solve it for themselves. They're completely at a loss. They have no idea what to do. And then this girl shows up and just tells them that the maze is a code. This isn't something that any of them think of. This isn't something that anything they see triggers them thinking about it. This isn't something they come up with. They are directly, explicitly told that the maze is a code. And then they have to figure out what that means. And that's what leads them to the whole, I wonder if we compare the sections thing. Presumably, they never would have figured that out without that hint. And not only that, they end up with these code words and they're like, well, what do we do with these? And so then Thomas decides to get stung by a griever to go remember what he remembers. And then he just tells them what they're supposed to do with the code. So they don't figure out that the maze is a code on their own. And they also don't figure out what they're supposed to do with the code on their own. And you might be thinking, but Meredith, you did say that one of their justifications was that they were looking for people who wouldn't give up on an impossible challenge. And so it had to be borderline impossible, right? So no wonder they needed these hints to solve it. Except, no! The whole point of this maze trial was to find the boys that could survive it. So they had to make it possible to solve. And there's so many lines in it, when they're talking about triggering the ending and all of that, there's lines in there that are things like, it has to end, this has gone on for too long, blah, 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 whatever. The implication I got is that the reason that Thomas and Teresa were sent into the maze is because nobody else was solving it. And they had designed it. And so Teresa remembers the code thing, and then Thomas remembers the other part about solving it. But that means that they made it too hard. And I would admit, I think they did. They want these boys to survive this trial because they want them for something else. If they were that annoyed, why not just end the trial? Like, these kids don't have to die inside of this maze. They weren't solving it, but you felt like they had shown what they needed to show you to potentially be the boys to go on this mission anyway because they had the tenacity you were looking for or whatever. Then, like, why not just let them out of the maze? You see what I'm saying? Like, there's actually so much about this book that makes no sense. And I will just never get over how little of it ended up being about the maze. I wanted so much more time in the maze. I wanted so much more about the maze. Like, what I thought I was going to read was a book about a bunch of kids trying to solve an impossible maze. And there being some like weird solution to it and them deducing what that solution is. Like, I thought it would almost be like a mystery. It did feel that way at points. And like I said, despite how much I'm ranting, I actually did quite enjoy my read. Like, I was entertained through a lot of it, but there was an incredulous aspect of that entertainment where, like, as some of these details were being revealed, I was just like, what? And it was getting like increasingly more ridiculous as time went on. And so it definitely did entertain me, and I wanted to know what the solutions to these things were. But then when the solutions came about, I was just annoyed at the fact that it wasn't the kids who figured it out, and it wasn't them who like solved any of this. And again, I'm assuming things, but the implication is that the reason why Thomas and Teresa were sent in is because it hadn't been solved yet, and they needed to end the experiment because it had gone on for too long. And actually, no, I'm not jumping to conclusions, because now that I'm talking about this, I'm remembering that as they're talking about triggering the ending and stuff, there's a line in there somewhere where Thomas says that they're trying to put them in desperate enough circumstances that they put themselves in enough risk to finally like solve everything. The boys were maybe too comfortable in the glade, and that's why none of them were willing to like be out in the maze overnight to try and see if there's anything about that gives them any clues, or like to jump into the Griever hole and stuff. Like, none of them were desperate enough to do stuff that dangerous, and so they had to like trigger this whole endgame thing to make them desperate enough to then find this final solution. So actually, that's coming back to me now. So there's just like infinite layers basically to why this premise makes no sense whatsoever. And yet, I had a great time, and I can't really explain it. And you know what? I'm not judging any of you, because I imagine that if I reread Twilight as an adult, I would feel very differently about it. My nostalgic attachment to it definitely does wonders for my entertainment value when I'm reading it. So I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum here, right at the end of talking about the book, as I've just been tearing it apart. Yeah, we all have young adult novels from our childhood that maybe don't hold up a ton under scrutiny, but that doesn't mean they're not fun. And that also doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy it as an adult. I just don't really know how to explain where that enjoyment came from. I just was hooked. I just did want to know what was happening. So yeah, that's The Maze Runner. And this is the part of the video when I do these videos where I start to talk about the movie, but I have no idea how long this edit is going to be at this point. I'm 2 hours and 40 minutes into filming. It's nearly midnight, yet I don't feel like I have enough to say about the movie to justify like a whole separate video. So normally I would go through the plot and tell you what's different about it, but I'm just going to summarize my thoughts here. They definitely changed some things. They changed some very big things. As an adult who doesn't really have an emotional attachment to this book, all of their changes kind of made sense to me, and none of them bothered me, but I could completely understand why somebody in like middle school or early high school who had read this book and loved it would have been really annoyed. Like, it's just little things like the cliff didn't really exist. They didn't do that. The Griever hole was in a different place. They still had that part. They never called it the Griever hole though. Thank God. What a silly name. Sorry. The serum doesn't get sent to them until much later. And so part of the movie is that nobody's seen a Griever and lived to tell the tale. Like, they think getting stung by a Griever immediately means death. But for some reason, they still bother to banish the guy that had been stung by the Griever and attacked Thomas. But yeah, so the serum doesn't come into play until much later. There's some plot changes surrounding him and Minho actually going into the maze. They end up successfully killing a Griever, and then they're able to get like a key out of it, and that's how they open the Griever hole. So it's stuff like that, right? They definitely made some core changes to the plot, but the heart of it was there. Towards the end of the movie, I was feeling like I was going to end up telling you that I actually liked the movie a lot better. I feel like they got the camaraderie of the boys across a lot better. And I feel like they just condensed some parts that didn't need to be as long as they were in the book. And I didn't mind any of the plot changes. I didn't think any of them really changed the core of what the story was. And I thought it just felt a lot more seamless and a lot more natural. And I also felt like they did a lot more of the problem solving themselves in the movie, which was something that I felt like I was really looking for from the book. But then, right at the tail end of the movie, we find out the reason why they were doing the maze. The justification they give in movie world is that they have this disease, it's incurable, but then all of a sudden there's a generation that's immune. And so this new generation of kids, like, they don't get this disease, and that they basically put them in the maze to put them under duress to study their brains and see what happens, which obviously is a major deviation from the books. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, then they must pivot hard for the next books, because the whole second book is about them going and trying to find something, like going on this big journey or whatever. And so what's our justification for doing any of that if that wasn't the reason they were put in the maze to begin with? But then they do still do the fake out thing where they think all the researchers got killed by a rebel group and then they're taken by the rebel group, but it turns out it was all staged by the researchers, and they say, okay, it's time to start phase 2. And it's interesting to me because as much as I just ranted about how little sense it makes that that was the reason why they had them in the maze, I guess I won't know until I read the second book and I see where the second book goes. Like, if you're doing a movie adaptation of a book series, how are you going to deviate that hard, right? If something that core to the story doesn't make sense, I feel like the answer is to work harder to justify it instead of throwing it away in a way that affects how you can follow the books going forward. And like I said, I think I'm going to have to read the next books to see how I feel about that. Like, if I read the next book and I'm like, yeah, because the premise made no sense, the whole book kind of didn't make any sense. Like, if that's how I end up feeling about it, then maybe I can understand why they made that deviation. If that's not how I ended up feeling about it, then I could see myself concluding that they should have just worked harder to justify the whole maze as a test thing instead of just completely throwing it away for a plot point that does make more sense up front. But then still, why are they still, like, what is the point of the next trial then of phase 2 or whatever? Like, if they were studying their brains, trying to figure out why their brains are immune, still feels like we're going to have to come up with something kind of convoluted to justify that, no? So I don't know. I'm very curious. That's why I'm definitely going to be continuing with this. I'm going to read the second book. I'm going to watch the second movie. Hopefully the video won't be as long. Jeez. I seriously was not expecting myself to talk for this long about this. So definitely subscribe so you don't miss it when I do that. That's going to be all for me today, you guys. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!